I'm Tom Falders, and it is my pleasure to welcome Neil Spiller this evening, who comes to us tonight from London. His visit to the Bay Area is sponsored by CCA Architecture and UC Berkeley College of Environmental Design. If your friends or colleagues happen to miss this lecture, you can catch him at UC Berkeley on Wednesday at 7. And should that not fit into anybody's schedule, you can catch him down in Los Angeles at SciArc next Wednesday as well. So text message your friends. Currently, Neil Spiller is Professor of Architecture and Digital Theory and Vice Dean of the Bartlett School of Architecture at the University College in London. In addition, he is the Director of the Advanced Virtual and Technological Architectural Research Group, also known as AVATAR. In putting together this semester, especially in light of significant global pressures and issues confronting architects and the state of architecture, I've been interested in bringing in a range of academics and practitioners who, though engaged in a wide range of diverse issues, are primarily recognized for their efforts in pushing the definition of architecture to unbounded limits and radical extremes. Architecture is more than functionalism and issue solving. Whether this is defined as environmental functionalism, urban expansion and economic functionalism, or tectonic and programmatic functionalism, though architecture is certainly all of these. But architecture has a distinct role, and I would argue a unique mandate, to think radically and artfully about seemingly impossible futures that in fact may indeed lead us to new and improved conditions for creating the realizable present. I immediately thought of inviting Neil Spiller, who has graciously agreed to come, who is a leading figure, international figure known for thinking very far outside the box, as he vigorously reminds us that in light of the exponentially expanding array of new technologies, that architecture will never be the same again. Spiller's work explores powerful influence of cybernetic, genetic, cyberspatial space-time vectors and their transmission, transmutation, and growth to challenge the traditional boundaries of building and landscape. His world is full of vacillating objects, sensing mechanisms, and what he calls poetic, pataphysical swerves. I hope we'll hear more about this. In effect, Spiller has spent the last 20 years mining the widening territories of cyberspace, nanotechnology, molecular science, and genetics in search of other models of thinking. Through his uniquely crafted personal architectural language, he translates these provocative streams of ideas into architectural projects that vary in scale from master plans and buildings to furniture. Besides his creative work and teaching, Spiller is a prolific writer and editor of books and articles exploring new technology and the history of digital theory. Though too many to list here, some of his recent books include Digital Dreams, The Architecture of New Alchemic Technologies, Maverick Deviations, Architectural Works from 1985 to 1998, and Visionary Architecture, Blueprints of the Modern Imagination in 2003, which analyzes the contributions and important influences of 20th century visionary paper architecture as it relates to the practice at large. His recently edited and co-edited collections include AD Architecture, Architects in Cyberspace, Architects in Cyberspace 2, and Reflexive Architecture, published by Wiley Academy in 2002. We are thrilled that he has traveled this far to be with us this evening. So please join me in extending a warm welcome to Neil Spiller.
Thank you very much, Tom. That's a very kind and generous introduction. Thank you. Do I have to have that on? That would be great. Thank you. I hate to see my victims' faces. Does this come on? Ooh. Oh, it's red. Right, okay. Well, I believe there's poetry in the soul of every man. In F-111 fighters and Roberto Duran. There's poetry on the air, babe, sliding across the sky. Surfs right down on the radio wave and into my hi-fi. I believe there's poetry locked right up inside my skin. Tigers caged in the quantum zone and I can hear them sing. Poetry's under pressure, sealed in an aerosol can. Splattered all around the ghetto wall and Skid Row mark I am. Poetry dances on TV, spins in the VCR. Poetry's made in Scotland and they sell it behind the bar. Now those are the words of my favourite philosopher, this man, the self-styled tattooed beat messiah, Zodiac Mind Walk. He's very important to the work that I'm going to show you. Now, I've been working on a project now for 10 years called the Communicating Vessels Project. And it's really a project that kind of deals with language, narrative, mnemonics, the vacillation of objects, wetness, personal epistemologies, and above all, machinic and human desire. So within this project, all sorts of manner of things are co-joined, mixed up. Issues of the architectural gateway, history, sculpture, biological growth, and cobra-linguistic, Joycean and Jarrian dynamics are folded into mythologies, ancient and contemporary. Worlds that collide with beautiful reflexive sparks that spread light on what it means to be human, creative and alive. Artfully confused, naive, receptive to anything, happenstance and synchronistic savagery. So, the boy was out late, but even so, he stopped outside the Angel Gate. A car went past. There was a rustling in the undergrowth. Suddenly, what seemed out of nowhere, the professor strode up to him. The clip of cowboy boots clanking on the rainbow tarmac. The professor crouched down, suppressing a Fremlin's belch. The boy smelt the hops on his breath, and he whispered into the boy's ear, "Defy the logic of alphabets. Run with thy swerve. Embrace the spiral. I am Klineman. I am Chinaman." Slightly frightened, the boy recoiled and the professor tapped the side of his nose. Simultaneously, the smell of gasoline and a just audible groan issued from ground level. The boy jumped on his bicycle and was off to another time. It is said that the professor has a garden of what on earthly delights, and yet was not above the gurgle and the crack. "You are a brave boy," he called after the boy, "to lean your bicycle up against the Angel Gate of Lilith." So this project, Communicating Vessels, has 66 subtitles, and here you see them. You probably can't read them from there, I certainly can't. And they include things from Shakespeare, Rude Mechanicals, E-I-E-I-O, Fruit of the Loom, Teeth, Teeth and More Teeth, The Dark Forest, once again revisited. About a few of those subtitles. Now, the gate that the professor talked about and that the boy leaned his bike up against is the first part of this project. This project's situated on an island where I grew up, and I'll show you some pictures of that island soon. In this first part of the Communicating Vessels project, our esteemed author, inspired by Benini's work, communes with the bees. He sees their shells and feels the fall of autumn leaves. He makes a bush between swans' wings, bridges across two chasms, dreams of Lilith and Daphne, and has a bit of a turn like dear old Saint Teresa. Finally, he introduces little soft machinery and speaks his raw and bleeding lament, leaving us to reflect on Brazilian topiary and muse on forests on pates. It's the Angel Gate, by the way. In 1966, Salvador Dali made a sculpture, which is this one, called Lilith, homage to Raymond Roussel. It consists of, I think, two angels pressed together and a series of paper clips pushed between them to kind of mimic the shape of female genitalia. Lilith, according to some mythologies, is the first wife of Adam. If we follow the passage in Genesis 1:27 closely, and I quote, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female he created them." This before describing the creation of Eve from Adam's rib. This is read by some to mean that God created a female at the same time as a male. God called her Lilith. But Lilith and her husband started to have what you young people might call a domestic about the jiggy-jiggy. A key medieval reference to Lilith features in the alphabet of Ben Shira, written between the 8th and 11th century. In it, she's quoted as saying, "I will not lie below." And he said, "I will not lie beneath you, but only on top." She uttered the name of God and went away. God sent 3 angels after her, but she rebuked them and mated with the demon Samuel and other demons to create what's known in the Bible as countless Lilin. And she is said to be the mother of all succubi and incubi. She appears oddly in C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. And I quote, "The White Witch would like us to believe that she's human," said Mr. Beaver. And it's on that she bases her claim to be queen. But she is no daughter of Eve. She comes from your Adam's first wife. Here they called her Lilith. So immediately at the entrance to my mnemonic island, this is a signifier of an alternative notion of beginning, of rebellion, of an alternative dark side, and female sexuality. So my angel consists of a series of forms that are meant to symbolize some of the fundamental issues and themes of antiquity, and vicariously forms and ideas reinterpreted by the greatest surrealist of them all, Salvador Dali. But also it features references to Bernini, 1598 to 1680. Added to this, it explores notions such as the ethical issues of nanotechnology, growth, digital space, and reflexive new landscapes. It is part of a complex interwoven architecture. The architecture's cybernetic entailment mesh invaginates on itself in a beautiful epistemological push and pull of association, juxtaposition, and subsumption. So this is a sketch of the gate. The angel's wings are based on a swan taking flight and obviously have associations with the mythology of Leda and the swan, and vicariously through to Dali's Leda Atomica, which features Mrs. Dali, Gala, as the love object of the gods. The bush between the wings is made of aerogel and grows. Its growth is conditioned by 2 factors, each reflexively remote. One is the changing number of leaves floating in Bernini's small fountain in the Piazza Barberini in Rome. This conditions the rate of growth. The more leaves in the fountain, the more fecund the bush's growth. This is the fountain. The second input transmits the vectors of growth. This input is by a kind of object that I call the drawing board duo. Incidentally, it's the site of this. I'll regress. On that Bernini fountain, there's the bees, which are the symbol of the papal family, the Barbarinis. Bees and wasps are very important to this project, and reference up to the wasp as the kind of sex cylinder in Marcel Duchamp's large glass. These are the drawing board duos. These are the things that sense the various cuts and lines on my drawing board that I've been using since 1980, and transmit them into a series of space-time vectors which then grow in this aerogel that create the kind of beard of the angel. So there they are going about the business. They're tethered together. They're kind of like, I don't know if you have in America, three-legged races, where you tie two people together with this leg next to another leg and you run as fast as you can. So they're kind of like that. Now the other thing that Bernini's work that's referenced this is Daphne and Apollo. This is originally from mythologies interpreted in things like Ovid's Metamorphosis. Apollo starts to fancy the daughter of the tree god, I think it is, called Daphne, who escapes his unwanted attention by turning into a tree. And here Bernini, in this most beautiful sculpture, catches her at that point, the beginning of that metamorphosis. So her hands are starting to go into branches, her feet are starting to go into roots, and the carapace of the trunk come up just as Apollo starts to wrap his arm around her. And she turns into a tree to escape him. And again, in the 1499 Hypnoeroto Mafia Prolifero, there are illustrations of kind of tree nymphs in various points of metamorphosis. So this is a kind of ancient mythology. It's also picked up by Salvador Dali, who drew pictures of Gala with olive branches coming out of her head as a Darwinian symbol of rejuvenation, vitality, life. That's why my bush grows. Also, another Bernini sculpture, one of his last ones, Truth Unveiled by Time, which is actually not finished. And one can see the various props. So when the sculpture was moved before it was put in its final place, it should be knocked out to support the fingers. And also it gives her third nipple there. And these are kind of like analogous to early computer-aided manufacture, when the scaffolding was actually used. The computer would work out where scaffolding would be to support the half-formed pieces. And again, here we see the pieces that should have been removed when the sculpture was finally put into place. What's important about this sculpture from the point of view of my own work is the weight of that foot on this wall, the weight of the foot of truth, which you'll find comes in handy later. Now, somewhere there is a little soft machinery, a magic creature, like you or me, but not like you or me. It grew up out of some stem cells, an old testicle, and a leaky bladder. He does things by desire, and little soft machinery lives on the island and under the foot of truth, below the bush pressed between the angel's wings. On the island there are a lot of systems. He plays with them like the D-stools and the Baroness. He makes grease for them and they love him. The professor watches him work, and the weight of the foot of truth sometimes makes him not contain himself. So, little soft machinery is a seed box, a little erector set, self-repairing. He thinks of delightful things. So here he is, right at the bottom of the angel. So little soft machinery is a very primitive, very stupid biomechanical system. Now, just for a moment, we can go back in time to Hieronymus Bosch, who I'm sure you know. He did this sketch. I've forgotten which, what date exactly, 15-something, characterised by these eyes growing in a field and these ears in a small copse. And that, to me, is a kind of emblematic illustration of some of the issues that I'm trying to explore with little soft machinery, the ethics of biotechnology. This is a close-up of little soft machinery. And he's inspired by a 1926, a little remembered book published in America, extraordinary story illustrated by the author's own Picabia-esque drawings. The book is called Little Machinery. It's a children's book, and it was the first time that an author created a children's character that was made purely out of the discarded items of industrial culture. These are some of the illustrations from that book. 1926, contemporary with things like Man Ray's cog rayograms, not so far after some of Picabia's work. And this is little machinery. This is little machinery meeting an owl or an eagle or a vulture. So you get the drift. And it was the first point, really, where suddenly children were being taught about mythical creatures that were, in some sense, industrial, as opposed to the Edwardian fairies, gnomes, toadstools, all that sort of thing. Now, of course, 1926 was a time, a much simpler kind of relationship with technology. And so my little soft machinery is a much more sinister and nasty little element. So, and we go back to Zodiac Mindwarp, who wrote a wonderful song called Holy Gasoline. I'm driving on holy gasoline. Nothing ain't what it seems when I'm driving on holy gasoline, said Zodiac. Now, little soft machinery lusts after cars. He is a contemporary Marinetti. And every car passes him, he revels in their pungent exhaust, fast vibrations and shapes. These inputs excite his secreting mechanism, and a drop of holy gasoline is produced. Eventually his bladder becomes so full that it cannot resist the weight of the foot of truth, and it expels its contents all over the road, from where the grease wanders off to the Baroness, or the D-stalls, or the alembics, or the wild fire dogs. Now, at this point, it's perhaps important to state that this is a pataphysical project, and the thing about pataphysics is, and I give you a definition, Alfred Jarry created the science of pataphysics in the late 19th century. Alfred Jarry was a precocious, slightly dwarfy man. I don't know whether you can say that. He lived in half a story, and that's where the John Malkovich thing comes from, being John Malkovich. He was a staunch Roman Catholic. He drank with a suicidal, zealous nature, a mixture of ether and absinthe, and would often ride his bicycle and fire shots above his head in the city of Paris. He created the poetic effrontery that's called pataphysics. Pataphysics is spelt apostrophe facing outwards, capital P, pataphysics. Pataphysics is Jarry's literary notion that essentially, as we say in England, takes the piss out of contemporary philosophers and scientists who were searching for a kind of holistic series of laws that govern the universe. And Jarry's point, which is a point that I use, is that everything is different, always. Everything is particular and everything is exceptional. You will never be sitting there thinking, what an idiot I am, dressed like that, ever again. Everything, every moment is different. For architecture, this is a very important idea. I'll talk a bit more about pataphysics later, perhaps. Well, suffice to say, there are three what's known as declensions of pataphysics. One is anomaly, and it should be borne in mind that this is obviously a pataphysical project. One is anomaly, one is hybridization, and the other is clinamen. Clinamen is the poetic swerve and is based on Lucretius's talking about atoms swerving towards Earth, and that curve. The curve allowing the choreography of chance. And this project is very much about that as well. This is the island. It's an island roughly where I was brought up. It's, I think, the smallest inhabited island in the UK. It's in a place called Forwich, which is near Canterbury in Kent, where the Archbishop comes from. And this is the site. This is where the angel wings are at the beginning of this site. And you get these wonderful vignettes. So, the professor ushers us. This is the pub the professor stumbled from just before he met the boy. The professor ushered us towards the water's edge. The misty dawn lifts to reveal 6 wooden boxes perched on the riverbank above a seldom bubbling, silent pond, its surface reflecting the tickle of midges and the sway of lazy branches. The boxes are attached to what look like fishing rods, which curve beautifully with the load of their catch. Each catch is not a fish, but a white alembic. Diana, 17 and nature's queen, if you know what I mean, wanders aimlessly around the boxes, finding and selecting one. She plonks herself down on one, sitting on the small seat. The box's invisible suspension inductors buzz ecstatically, realigning themselves. The fishing rods tug on the neck of the alembics, up and down, up and down, up and down. A small globule of grease from the alembic floats downstream. Beneath her, Diana can hear the whirl of the clinamen, swerving in its palace of pataphysical devices and machines, desire being swerved into poetry and vicariously into a reflexive landscape. Diana is a stranger to this form of mechanical love. One day she prized the lid off one of the boxes. She blinked in disbelief at what she saw. This is a drawing of the outside of the boxes seen across the river. 6 boxes, 6 fishing rods, each tugging on the end of an alembic. An alembic is the alchemist's kind of glass vessel, which are in the water. A sensitive bridge, the grease represented here in black as it comes out of the neck of the alembic. The grease, as you'll remember, made by little soft machinery. The Dee stalls are a kind of reference back to the alchemist, John Dee, who hid his most special books in trunks up the chimney. And this is also, as well as being a pataphysical project, it's also an alchemic project. It's alchemic because it takes the prima materia, the most lowly of things that we all don't value, and makes it into a kind of philosophical gold. And the lowliest material that we all take for granted as architects is space. So I hear you say, what's inside the box? What's inside the box, Neil? Well, I'll show you. This is what's inside the box. The interior of the boxes encloses a machinic tableau. Each box has two slightly inclined sides opposite one another. Their sides are only pristine once. There is a small table at the centre of each box. Set on the floor are some draft pistons, a cucumber, two de Chirico mannequins, featured from de Chirico's painting Disturbing Muses of 1925, a ubiquitous umbrella, a teeth paver machine from Raymond Roussel's Locus Solus, some Swiftian academic gearage, a ready-made bicycle wheel attached to a stool, a Duchampian voyeur's door, a shelf on which 5 artificial lips are perched, another shelf supporting a glass alembic, and a turd-shaped mystery object. Can I just see a little insect hugging the corner of the glass? Also on the table is a box with calf lungs rails beneath it. Mounted on the large angle poise on the table is my prize, the Clinamen. This is a miniature pataphysical laboratory executing an experiment quite simply out of control. My Clinamen is inspired by Alfred Jarry's and his character Dr. Faustroll, a professor of pataphysics, you'll understand, his painting machine, which incidentally is called in the novel also Clinamen. The painting machine is a revolving gyroscope that whirls at random through the palace of machines, according to Jarry, mechanically vandalising masterpieces. And I quote, it dashed itself against the pillars, swayed and veered in infinitely varied direction, and followed its own whim in blowing onto the wall's canvas. The succession of primary colours ranged according to the tubes on its stomach. This is from the Journeys and Opinions of Dr. Faustroll from 1911, published posthumously as Jarry drank himself to death. My Clinamen also whirls, spraying paint from the tendrils of its anemone-like head. It is a maverick painting machine with no respect. It is activated when the box is sat on and deactivated when the sitter stands up. So you say, well, Neil, can you draw a perspective for that? I say, yes. So here we have the draft pistons, the Swiftian academic gearage, the Duchamp bicycle wheel, the teeth paver, the turd-like object beside it, the alembic, the disturbing view, path lungs, rails and box, voyeur's door, and the Clinamen. Now, as the little girl sits on the box, the Clinamen whirls, spraying paint along the interior. Simultaneously, the virtual terrain that passes through the actual terrain of the box. And this virtual terrain is made up of a planting plan that is, instead of plants, has areas of poetry, surrealist poetry. As the paint hits certain areas, certain bits of that poetry is recorded and remixed. So it's a surrealist painting poetry machine. And there you see the two things. So it appears here and starts to go out and it's not here. So it's continually evolving. Why, I hear you cry? Well, you will find out. So here, poetry is swerved into the exceptional, never to be repeated, a cybernetic monkey, forever searching for a surrealist Shakespeare, and often finding him. The clinomanic Medusa, with a hole for its face, causes the first order aesthetics of form finding to coagulate into stone and seduces the viewer into a world of vicissitudes and attitudes of chance, of joy, of sweet and sweaty embrace of an art combinatoria. so dear to the proto-surrealist writers such as Alfred Jarry, Raymond Roussel, and even earlier the alchemic magi Ramon Lull. So here, pataphysics joins with the mathematic of Oulipo to construct an all too few example of Uapo, a miniature architecture of potential. So this clinamen is defined by a cybernetic universe of discourse, which consists of all Batokian times and their durations, local turbulence, local currents, flings of the tousled paint main, and unseen surrealist data landscape as an interchangeable software application and the sweet tug of a fisherman's rod. The first splashes of the clinamen determine the start of all the vistas on the island, as just for a few seconds the virtual topology of poetic plants is replaced by a virtual site plan in the interior of the first box ever to be sat on. So I'm now making the box become the master planner for my landscape, and I'm going to show you now a series of vistas that are created, and the starting points of those vistas are to do with the splashes of those paints. The winter air chills my sinuses. My toes are slightly numb. In the dark night, Guimar's mantis lights its own balleretic as it drags Millet's paranoid yet highly critical wheelbarrow behind it. I hear the sound of pneumatic inflation, of expanding bread, and avert my gaze. Suddenly I'm aware of someone or something else in the nanogel copse. I see Ubu's ghostly form dancing like death, but he disappears quickly this time. I follow the Boots the Chemist vista for a while down to the riverside and peer through a bee gate, still enjoying its fecund bulges and pleasing vectors. Through the gate I see the Georgian Dragon pub, beckoning for a swift pint. I remove another a small metallic stone from my pocket. On the outside it says Maverick Deviation, and I wonder what image is inside it. I will never know. Back outside the pub with malted breath, I hear the rustle of a stone dropping onto a haystack, the momentary silence, the short zing and the dull thud onto a haystack. And the dull thud of metal hitting gloved leather, and the final drop onto the moist turf. Its slight warmth giving off a miasmic stream, I wonder. I wondered if it said Fremlins on its side, and I return to the warmth of the pub's fireside to enjoy the sparkle of the pumps and another pint of real honey. Did I hear a coyote howl? I don't think so. This is the Velázquez machine. Velázquez, in his great painting Las Meninas, was the first time an artist actually painted himself painting, in a sense. And also what it did optically as he peers out of the canvas with all the court of the Spanish court behind him. And in a sense, Velázquez was the first narcissistic artist. So that's why this machine is called the Velázquez machine. Its site is the elliptical galleries where Monet's water lilies are housed in the Tuileries Gardens in Paris, and it sits in front of those. It vibrates. It vibrates in an ever-quickening and violent cycles based on the number of artists and architects who post stuff on the internet about themselves. So it vibrates to their narcissism, and partly to mine. It's made up of a few vital components. One is this kind of clasped rib-like cage, inside which is a frying pan with holes punched in the bottom of it. On the frying pan are two fish. Underneath the frying pan with its perforated holes is a hypersensitive tongue. Also in the cage are the roux objects. The roux objects are 9 hyperchloric kangaroo-like objects, like mechanical fleas, and I'll show you a picture of them. And what they do, once activated, they jump up and down, inoculating the fish with hydrochloric acid, which decomposes. Bits of the fish fall onto the sensitive tongue, and those vectors are sent from Paris to Canterbury, and become the planting plan of little bits of a vista. As the machine vibrates, this fried egg, a reference, of course, to the Velasquez and Spanish vernacular painting, and Dali, vibrates more and more on its plumb line. It's not really like that, is it? That's it. Those vectors are then taken and transmitted again to Canterbury from Paris and become the trajectory of a moving sculpture that oscillates around the vista. That's a roux object. You see the little piles of hydrochloric acid, the bouncy bits, there's one bouncy. Here's a bit of artful malarkey. It starts to show little vistas that blow up. I'll show you more of that in a minute. That's the first input machine. The second remote input machine is the measuring stick. And the measuring stick resides in the courtyard and within Bramante's Tempietto in Rome, which is now past the Spanish embassy. There's a bit of Spain in Rome. This is Bramante's wonderful, I think, 1502, the Renaissance flowering in Rome, so trying to accomplish the kind of Renaissance classical ideal. The measuring stick is moved around. There are kind of little Spanish guards there to move the stick around. I'll show you the stick in a minute. And the stick senses two things. It senses the difference from full-blown classical proportion to the actual built object. And it also senses the even bigger discrepancies between the courtyard that's now built around it and the courtyard that virtually Bramante planned, which I will show you, which is a radial courtyard. There's a bit of my malarkey in there, but so that's what he planned. So this measuring stick discovers dimensions. Those dimensions are turned into speeds and velocities, and they're about how the vista progresses. So that again is transmitted back to Canterbury. So what's this measuring stick look like, Neil? Well, I'm not really sure, but I've got some models. So this is the first kind of conceptual sketch of what this measuring stick might do. So these are version 1. Version 2. Now the vistas, back on the island. First we're going to consider the wheelbarrow with expanding bread, which is the object sculpture. And this is the receiver of a lot of the output information gleaned from the stick and the Velasquez machine. It is characterized by a symbiotic relationship between its position and the vista that forms around it. So its vectors, as I said, are informed by the oscillation of the fried egg on the Velasquez machine. Now, as you can see, there's also other things formally going on there. There's the bread, which I will get to in a minute, but there's also Hector Guimar's Paris Metro light, which Salvador Dali, through using his paranoid critical method, decided was a praying mantis, and that linked up to his kind of psychosexual interpretation of the praying mantis, which, as you know, after it makes love, the female bites the male's head off. So it's part of the castration, the Freudian castration thing that inspired Dali. It also, the wheelbarrow comes from Millet's La Angelus, another Dali's paranoid critical method, which a couple, heads bowed, praying at the Angelus bell. Dali, through the paranoid critical method, injected it with a lot of kind of psychosexual associations. The wheelbarrow was the position that they are supposedly about to make love in. Now, the expanding bread is an example. It's not real bread, obviously, that'd be silly. It's kind of pneumatic bread. And it has a basic subsumption architecture, and that is, whoever looks at it, it tries to get 50% of its surface in your own vision. Now, if more than two people look at it, it's in trouble, and it writhes about. That'll be useful later. So here is maybe a master plan of a particular vista. The pellets of the fish being moved over time, moved on aerogel, not real stuff, aerogel, kind of 99% of invented, and made it up. The trajectories of the vistas convert the wheelbarrow and bread. The viewpoints over time of different viewers. The expanding bread at certain points, and the parallax, where the bread expands, cutting out a certain area from one viewer at a certain point of time. Now, I wanted something to inhabit those spaces of darkness that only one person could see, but fleetingly with that. And I wanted to go back in kind of classical mythology to the Dance of Death. This is some pictures from Holbein's Dance of Death. A lot of the artists did Dance of Death series, and they're rarely characterised by death at your shoulder. Even the most pious man can be reminded that soon you'll be dead, pal. So, a bit of humbleness. So, even Adam. And I wanted to reference, again, to make sure that the pataphysical was part of this, and to reference my great respect for Alfred Jarry and the exceptional in particular. Alfred Jarry's second, or probably more well-known character that he's remembered for is the character of Père Ubu. Père Ubu was a tyrant. He had a kind of crocodile's head and a spiral on his belly. And a series of plays were made. Jarry became famous because he invented a very special word, which is the first word in Père Ubu, in the stage production of Père Ubu, which there were numerous. And the first word that scandalised Paris at the time was shite. Alfred Jarry invented the word shite. Now, in these special kind of parallax zones, I wanted something that would do that for me. And so this is what I wanted to appear. This is a photograph entitled Père Ubu by Dora Maar, who at one stage was the mistress of the chapel. So I wanted this to appear in the split second like the Dance of Death behind the wheelbarrow, when you glimpsed it and other people couldn't because of the parallax of the expanding bread. So I think we find it's all going quite swimmingly. So this is a composite drawing. I show that because I like it. So here's an overall site plan. So once we've got the vistas and how they work, and we've got the starting point of the vistas based on the initial splash of painting of these tools, where do the vistas end up? This is that area. These vistas are all joined and coded to places where, because I believe in second order cybernetics, there was a census in the UK about 5 or 6 years ago. 100,000 people in the UK took their religion Jedi. I'm a radical constructivist, and I believe that I make my world by operating and building within it. And you make your world, which is totally different to mine, by operating and building your own world. So all our worlds are different. And that also leads me to this exceptional particular idea. So where I make my vistas, can only be to do with me. And these are areas where things in my youth happen to me. Things like, well, you know the sort of things. Places of my first kiss. That difficult night in the atmosphere I was in check. Or wherever, you know. And that's where the distance comes. I need a little bit. And they'll come in useful in the end. I like this site plan because it has the light of God. And the light of God is also quite important. Now, the vistas grow over time. And so if we take these simple kind of drawings, it shows how that kind of landscape evolves. I'll talk about the other kind of forms in there in just a second. At the beginning of each vista, I wanted to place a temple of repose, which is a traditional kind of antiquarian landscape object in picturesque landscapes. And around that temple of repose, I wanted to get a kind of circular rotating thingy. And here it is. And it's based on the surreal interpretation of Gradiva. Gradiva was a character in, I think, Arthur Jensen's book in the late 19th century. And it talks about her touching the ground lightly with one foot, like this. And the surrealists began to get very obsessed with Gradiva, and Dali worked on Gradiva. There's also a variety of other things. What I want you to notice particularly in front of the very large stone is the baseball glove and the tennis that it's holding. There's very other stuff which I won't go into. There's a small dog there. Trying to be short. And these are the tracks of this rotating thing. Now, what's the temple of repose look like? This is merely its kind of moon, its orbit. Temple of repose is inspired by Diderot's pictures of how to cast a man on a horse. So immediately it's kind of like the architecture before the architecture. So when you cast a negative and a positive, and you kind of get the tubes that allow it to breathe. Behind that is this ear-shaped thing. It's Ubu rib dusty. An unlikely ally in this project comes in the form of Le Corbusier, who also was obsessed by Père Ubu. And indeed, rumour has it that on the concrete facade of Ronchamp there is indeed his representation of the character Père Ubu, and there are certainly a series of graphic pieces with which this area is based. Odd, really. So around the Temple of Repose, there's a kind of table dropping the telescope on me. What was this? Inside here is a kind of casting thing that drops these pellets onto this rather warm haystack. And that comes from Salvador Dali's idea of psycho-atmospheric objects. Imagine, he says, being in a totally dark room, being given an object, told to feel it, then someone else comes in and photographs it in the dark, no flash bulb, and then casts that camera in lead and gives you the lead object. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that? That is a psycho-atmospheric object. You don't know what's on the film, you don't know what the camera looks like, you've got this thing. So you imagine stuff into it. These are all psycho-atmospheric objects. They're formed here, a webcam or something at the end of the distance in those bits where things happen to me, take pictures, don't know where, don't know what. They're cast in lead, they land on there, and then by electromagnetic force, they zing off the haystack and are caught by the catcher's mitt of baseball. Once they are caught, they are dropped through the hole in the little thing, and you get this kind of circular geometry. And each one of them has inscribed on them things that I mentioned, like maverick deviation, the title of my monograph. There's the hole, there's the rug, there's the object just getting caught, there's the hole, there's one being dropped. And these are the tracks that make. And as they move from vista to vista, that's why you get those funny squirrely lines on the side plane. And so this is what you get. You get the wheelbarrow, center of repose, starts at the distance, using love speed. At the end of the vistas, I wanted to have bee gates. If you imagine a bee with a small antenna stuck to its forehead, and you let it buzz about a bit, and you track those space-time vectors in a computer, and you mess about with it, you might get something like this, you might get something like that, or you might get something like that. Then you transmit those vectors, decide what they are, where they stop, transmit those vectors to a computer-aided manufacture machine, and you can make a heavy metal Art Nouveau gate. This one is made of aerogel, and at the end of each vista there'll be a kind of smoky Art Nouveau gate based on the bee's trajectories, looking something like that. So, what determines the dimensions of the psychoatmospheric objects I hear you cry? Well, good question. The genetic gazebo. In the 60s, Gordon Parr, one of the founding fathers of second order cybernetics, tried to build a self-wiring electric system. He had some success. It was based with putting electrical charges through silver nitrate, changing those pulses around, and therefore the wiring grew according to the strength of the pulses. So it's a very simple evolving system, and it was susceptible and could determine different frequencies of sound. These are some of the few pictures. I've got more. This is the kind of array of electrical impulses. Let me show you how the thing works. This is mine. We have a 4x4 array. These are electrical cables. There's a piece of amber in the middle. This is a bird bath divided into 4. And a small bit of gerbil there. Now, this is some contemporary dendrite. They're called dendrite systems. This is what happens in self-growing electrical systems based on impulse. So, what I wanted to do was create a system that would give me the kind of anamorphic dimensions of those psychoatmospheric objects, but also would tell me something else about the nature of life, the universe living in. This is a piece of amber with a prehistoric insect in it. The DNA of those sorts of insects has been taken out of the amber, and insects related to that insect have been bred. So we're now at the point where we can use the DNA code of long dead animals to be a driver for architecture. Recently, a series of stem cells have been linked up to a drawing machine and produced a picture. They kind of look like icons. So what's all that about? When the artist is only half alive or half dead? These are some of the important ethical questions we have to ask ourselves. So the genetic gazebo uses such things as a way of distributing the electrical charge around the dendrite system and vicariously creating geometries which become the dimensions of the psychoatmospheric object. So there you are. And also decorating the ceiling of the gazebo at the same time, as these pods go up and down and start to sprout aerogel. And the impulses will be a combination of the DNA code at certain points in there, and the DNA, the oscillations of birds bathing in the 4 different parts of the profile, and the DNA of a gerbil I had who died in 1976, called Mickey. This is Leonardo da Vinci's pretend grotto gazebo ceiling, and I wanted that effect as well on the ceiling. Now it's powered by the river Slapper, and it has a long neoprene tie and it slaps on the surface. So that helps, in a sustainable and ecological way. There it is on site. These are some of the anamorphic projections of the psychoatmospheric objects. I'm going to quickly tell you about the Baroness, also from the Hypnoerotomachia Slipro, 1499. Bowers, very important in landscape design. This is the Baroness Elsa Freytag von Lorenhoven. She was a Dada artist, Dada poet, performance artist in New York, 1917. Here is her, looking a little bit surprised. I want you to notice up here the bird cage with a rather cracked, fallen canary in it. She made stuff. This is something, a hip object. She was very weird. She got arrested all the time. This is an earring she made out of ready-made. This is a sculpture she made called Circle. This is her best sculpture, which is contemporary with Duchamp's Fountain in Rhine. And this one is even naughtier than Duchamp. It's called God. So God becomes a series of sort of contorted, phallus-like plumbing. She had the studio next to Martin Duchamp, but she fell in love with Martin Duchamp. She made a sculpture of him here, and it was coming out of the wine glass. She wrote a poem to him called, well, I shall recite it to you. Marcel, Marcel, I love you like hell, Marcel. And once you've learned about the Baroness, you've got to have one yourself, haven't you? So this is the first sketch of my Baroness. This is the second one. She had a dog called Pinky. Pinky used to sit on her arm. She used to call it the Schippenhound or the mutt swine. Here represented by these two ball-like objects. The Baroness was an extraordinary woman. She wrote amazing poetry called the best-known piece is called The Cast Iron Lover, which kind of simulates the act of love, if you like, in terms of the language of the First World War, explosions, blood and death. She depicted the male of the species as a defecating toad. And obviously Duchamp is crucial to this project. The large glass, the bride in the top corner, the draft piston, the vibrating bachelors in the bottom half. So this is my bower. I won't tell you how it's made. There's a lot of stuff, and I've been working on this project for 10 years. I can't tell you all about it, but anyway, there's this bower, right, which the Baroness hangs in. The vibrating bachelor here is taken by Jacob Epstein's rock drill, a sculpture that even frightened him. He took off all this and just left the torso, and never did anything like that again. And again, it was contemporary with the Baroness, 1913, 1918, kind of robot domineering the world, riding on technology. It scared him. And again we go back to the Dance of Death. Here's a modern Dance of Death. Death here on stilts, teetering like rock drill. We go back to Bernini. Man rushing from the flames of Rome, his young son following, carrying his own father, and vicariously he's carrying the family gods. And here it is. So, the Baroness hanging in a bower, blowing the draft pistons from the various space tubes that she has, powered by holy gasoline. Pinky hanging there, terrible. Rock drill with his stomach of imagination. That was shall we believe that the primary organ of imagination was the stomach. Carrying the three gods, the three architectural gods designed. Mike West's The Third Man, Peter Wilson's Ninja, and Ben Nicholson's Telephone Cupboard. If you don't know those projects, please go and find them. They are lovely. The Baroness's last act was a very small film in collaboration with Man Ray and Duchamp, called The Baroness Elsa von Freytag von Lorenhoven shaving her pubic hair. This is the only still that survives of that. I hate to say, I guess the guys fluffed it up. Anyway. And it just seems to me that there's a kind of resonance. I mean, I'm not a proper historian. I've done this lecture to realist historians, and they mutter about this. But the Baroness used to frighten people. She smelled. She had a bra made out of old tomato tins. She often had nothing under her coat and used to flash herself at ambassadors. But one wonders, doesn't it? One wonders whether Duchamp was the vibrating bachelor to the Baroness's bride. She died in Paris, 1926, gas leak, Pinky at her side. On the same day, Hugo Ball, another Dadaist, inventor of sound poetry, and you can see some examples there, also died within hours of one another. So I only have one thing to say about that. Two Dada die. That's what the Baroness would have looked like in New York in 1917. No wonder she got in trouble. That's a performance artist dressed up as Baroness. You see, she often used to wear stamps as kind of beauty spot. Anyway, the last thing I want to show you, and very quickly it is as well, the professor finally ushers you in to his study. And in his study is based on sort of visions of Courbet, the artist study, even Duchamp photographed in his studio, where the study itself becomes a kind of macrocosm of the architectural work. And here we see two vistas, partly inspired by Cornelius Meyer from his Single Room for a Gentleman, 1689. And you can see, I'll show you each of the four elevations, the wonderful things that a gentleman should have in his discreet small space. Tool cupboard, linen cupboard, silver safe, you know, fire dogs. And also inspired by St. Augustine, Carpaccio's picture. St. Augustine in his study, listening to the light and word of God coming through his window. But actually, so does his dog. And actually, God's talking to the dog, really. So there he is, St. Augustine, surrounded by a series of mnemonic objects. And the whole point about this project is that it's about the objects defining his philosophy, the painter's philosophy, religious iconics. So here's one end of the professor's study. The dog is replaced by a philosophicity and a profession. The word of God in baguette form and spoon. The whole place is full of icons from my project, both within this project and also from other projects. There's my vitriolic column. The fire dog fueled by holy gasoline. But also these funny Bradford type objects. If you imagine you can link up a spray can to a computer and spray air out of it, and you can make zones in a room like graffiti, which you can suddenly, with a little aerial on your head and some headphones, stick your head into it and listen to Van Halen. So I wanted some of that. And that's, where does the cyborgian geography go? We have a virtual and an actual environment, and they are forever becoming much more kind of integrated. Of course, it's a surrealist project, so one needs sewing machines, one needs umbrellas, one needs dissecting tables. The other end of the studio is based on Dali's, I forget what it's called now, 6 corneas watching me and Gala in the mirror. And it has, I'm going to finish up very soon, so do not fret. It has a variety of things in it, particularly things inspired by James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. Another wonderful, one might even hazard to say pataphysical book. One of the main characters in that is called Shem, Jerry, or Shem, alias Alfred Jarry, some would argue. Joyce called Alfred Jarry me inner man monophone, and there's a lot of stuff here about sort of what architectural space is composed of, and it's here, the architectural space is composed of, I shall tell you in a minute. The thing at the end of the room, the kind of wallpaper, is my wallpaper of Shem. And it's made up of sort of facsimiles of some of my earlier projects. But actually, it's made of fountainly battles, septic plans, scarlet crosses, bowls of intellectual fluff, mental chewing gum, bridesmaids' trains, drill altars, plump black lines, lights in the black, Nelson watchers, Pinter splinters, optimistic commissions, disappointment, drop-cutting acridity, and phlegm. Now, just as a very quick parting thing, I think it's probably appropriate to put all my friends back to bed. Good night, room. In the great green room, there was a Darwinian bone, and a black balloon, and a picture of a big fishy spoon. And there were dummies sitting on boxes, and there were 2 little slam hounds, and a pair of psychoatmospheric objects airbound, and a little bird, and a muff all furred, and an alembic of grease all able, and the professor whispering swerve, good night room, good night bone, good night young lady sitting on boxes, good night aerogel fog, good night baseball glove, good night back balloon, good night wasps and foxes, good night bird, good night objects all furred, good night gasoline and grease, good night desire and relief, good night placebo, good night gazebo, good night table and sewing machine, good night rock drill all lean, Good night, Professor, whispering dream. Good night, Vista. Good night, Christ, twisting his sister. Good night, Amber. Good night, Zodiac. Good night, Spaces, all elastic. Thank you very much. It sticks in your mind, doesn't it, really? I suppose, any questions? Any questions? It's kind of based on, there's a wonderful book that was against in the 1960s, Francis Yates, The Art of Memory. And it talks about, in the old days, before there was writing, magicians or clergy would learn their lines, as it were, by inhabiting a world full of virtual objects in virtual spaces in their kind of mind's eye. Yeah. And they would learn their lines by navigating, pretending they were looking at those spaces, making associations between object space and sort of spaces already. And that's the kind of classical art of memory. So every object, it may look random, it may look but everything resonates something else. Religious art theory, or classical mythology, antiquity. It does kind of beg the question how much the project takes. Because I've only shown you probably 2/3 of what there is, and I know there's got to be a shipping review of this. Things you lay away from.
We tend to shy away from our own eroticism and our own desire, and I guess as artists and architects, we celebrate this product today. Could you say a little bit about the importance of looking into yourself and minding your own interests and the importance of looking at a world that only exists and should probably only exist. I mean, we communicate with the dead in a more profound way than we're living, and I think that's probably something that I would do.
Yeah. On one level, it's kind of a middle-aged crisis, isn't it? Middle-aged bloke, flowery shirt. Going on about young girls sitting on top. But also on an intellectual level, it links to sort of those ideas of mechanisms within the psychology of lifestyle, and the issue of desire as a kind of driving motor for creative work. And I wanted to talk on a polemic level about exactly that, about the things we as architects shy away from, and yet are all around us. You know, another kind of chemistry experience. And I wanted to sort of explore original ways of how we might talk about this architecture, the desire component of the architecture. Because it's immediate, it's about eye, putting the eye back into architecture. So I thought that was kind of important. The other thing about the project really is it's originally conceived to kind of scratch next all the kind of continuum that we have in space and technology with architecture too. Technology is polarizing the story and the one that's totally genetic and material. And I wanted to kind of, with each of the pieces, kind of set the dials on different parameters and see what happens. And also to include the kind of the character of the professor is obviously inspired by Randy Randolph. When you get a professor who's hanging around with weird garden invention. And of course the professor's me. And I also wanted to talk about things that Well, maybe just a little naughty in a kind of English multiplicity. So yeah, this is why I think it's kind of something that the way it looks also in that so deeply to the floor of the section through some classes try to communicate with them in some sort of way recognized or like their kind of alternate development. So the kind of mnemonic landscape is really a kind of journey also around my particular architecture. So there is a variety of architecture. I'm thinking particularly about quite different migrant technology. And again, it's challenging islands. But also, other ways of just talking about architecture. How do we teach architecture when we can have a virtual, invisible raptor in Van Halen inside it? How do we, you wouldn't have done well. I just want to kind of make it important polemically to say, this is how mad it can get, and it can probably get a lot mad.
Given the history and specifically the genre for critiquing, let's say, rationality, instrumentality of modernism by using machines and devices to become expressions of desire, unconscious, etc. How do you place your work in relation to, let's say, in relation to that context, except in the present?
Sure. Well, 100 years old.
Except for the aerogel.
Yeah, sure. Well, my point really is that as advanced technologies impact on what we do as architects.
Can you use the microphone?
Sorry.
The fan is really loud. That's not modern technology. Or modern enough. Thank you.
The use of things over 100 years old at first seems quite weird, but as architecture's become more and more impacted upon by advanced technology, particularly issues of virtuality, biotechnology, nanotechnology, the old kind of thought experiments and paradigms of surrealism and Dada seem to be important. Salvador Dali and the soft watch, for example. Our technology is now becoming soft and wet and disappearing. Genetic engineering could be used to create some of the more sort of terrible deformities of Dali's work. Dali, equally as me, was interested in sort of Velázquez and Las Meninas and that kind of sort of optical geometries of anamorphosis and where the viewer completes the work and all that sort of thing. So I really sort of pitched it there because I feel that a lot of those tactics are up for re-examination in the light of advanced technology. I think I've done a reasonable job in kind of reinterpreting them. I like them. I've always had a particular kind of interest in that way. I'm very much interested in the way that the simple act of bringing two disparate things together can be used as a thought experiment that can help you kind of think outside the box, kind of blue sky thinking. So in that respect, I'm very much on board with Louis Aragon, who talks about the kind of almost mystical operations of collage. No. However, the spiral is an interesting. Jarry used it as the kind of symbol for pacifism. And the spiral can also be interpreted as the kind of symbol of second-order cybernetics, which is a kind of circular geometry, kind of feedbacking mechanism. But if you add the time dimension, it's kind of opening up and spiral. I've been interested in the spiral motif, in that relation. I don't know enough about Frank Lloyd Wright and his involvement with those sorts of forms, but I'd love to make the connection.
Well, that's been from the 19th.
Right.
First spiral, Solomon Guggenheim.
Yeah.
His presentation of her work on the
Right. Right. Well, that would be a very nice link to explore. No, yeah. Well, I'd love to get all the great modern masters on side. I've already got Korg, so I'd like Wright, and I'd like Mead, and I'd like Alvar Aalto, sort of. So I think I'd have to work quite hard to do that. But no, it's interesting.
Yeah, can you relate or put in relation the notion of desire and the buildability? In other words, if we're ought to build, does that fulfill desire or fulfilling man's state of desire? Or in other words, are these projects meant to remain as potential, never to be built?
My relationship to building is one I practiced as a building architect for 10 years. At one stage I was Margaret Thatcher's architect, not for political allegiance, but and the act of building for me I found extremely frustrating because of the people that are involved in it. Clients, I believe they're called, and the other lot, builders, I believe they're called, all of which compromise and stuff. This work's not intended to be built. But if someone came to me and said, "I love your work, I'd really like you to knock me up a house," I'd be more than delighted. But it has to be in the style of Neil Spiller. I'm not into, as a colleague of mine at the Bartlett calls it, I'm not going back on the mattress again. Unless it's my mattress. I mean, the deeper question about desire and the act of the consummation of that desire, I think, is yes, then you have to desire something else, because I think by its nature, ontologically, desire is about not having something in a way, or working towards having something and then working towards having another desire. I'm not sure. It's a deep question. I don't feel particularly qualified, particularly as a man, to answer.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.